Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Marvel Reread Club. We are so excited. We have a very special guest. We have one of the most popular podcasters in the United States of America, an Emmy-winning writer, a superstar in so many ways. This is an old friend of mine, Dan McCoy. Welcome, Dan.
Wow. I should have been on earlier if I knew I was going to get this treatment. I guess that's all true. I guess so. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, you were a writer for The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and then later for The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. You won a bunch of Emmys for that. How many Emmys have you won?
Me personally, 2. So compared to my other podcast co-host, Elliot, I'm Emmy poor.
Yes.
Because he was there for a long time when they were on their winning streak.
But before you were on The Daily Show and after, you started a podcast in the early days of podcasting called The Flophouse, where you talk about flop movies. Now, I have just been so impressed by your success of this podcast. At one point on the Onion AV Club, they always have to just write up press releases as if they're funny news stories. And there was a press release saying that the Obamas were getting into podcasting. And the way that the AV Club summarized that is, I guess the Obamas have a lot to say about crappy movies because they're starting a podcast. And I'm like, That's a Dan McCoy joke. That's obviously there are multiple bad movie podcasts, but one of the most prominent ones is Dan McCoy's. And they're making a Dan McCoy joke about the Obamas.
We were fortunate enough to be one of the first to do that now extremely popular format. Certainly of like the big ones. There's also, We Hate Movies. There's How Did This Get Made, which has the benefit of having actual famous people on it. But we got in early, which is one of the major secrets to our success. We got in early.
One of the best. You could have easily been eclipsed by younger, smarter, handsomer men, but you were not. You have managed to keep your place.
It's true. Thank you. I mean, like, there's actual value to the show. I don't want to dissuade anyone who might not have listened from going to listen. Like as Matt said, I wrote for The Daily Show. Elliot, my co-host, wrote for The Daily Show. Stuart, the third co-host, it has no comedy background, but has grown to become a very funny comedian himself from being a funny man who had no interest in comedy. I thought originally when you're like, before all that, I went to college with him, which is also true.
So Dan and I went to Earlham College together in Richmond, Indiana. And then we ended up living in Minneapolis at the same time a little later. And then we ended up living in New York City at the same time a little later when we were both newlyweds and our wives became good friends. We became good friends. I mean, our wives also both went to their same college. All right, let me say this again.
Matt, what it sounded like is you were saying, oh yes, we were in college together, then we were in this city together, then we were in that city together, and we were newlyweds. And
Wait. Let me back up. Let me try this again. We went to college together. We were in Minneapolis together. Then we both went and married women. We're both very straight, I promise you. We then both went and married women, and then we ended up in New York, women who also went to the same college as the two of us went to, even though it was, in both cases, a case of we left college very much unmarried and then panicked and got married to also shortly thereafter.
This means nothing to the listeners. It's just a stickler for personal history. My wife at the time, I have
yes.
I've
this
remarried.
Is not Dan's current wife. Dan, you actually married a fan of your podcast, correct?
That sounds a lot shadier than I'd like to. We went to karaoke together, Audrey and I, for years. It was related to the network I'm on, Maximum Fun. But I had no idea until much later that she specifically listened to my show and Elliot Show, Stuart's show. I got to know her through the art of karaoke, although she also makes a point of telling people that I did not talk to her for a year, which is nothing about her and everything about my social shortcomings, including a late in life, just this last year, diagnosis of neurodivergence, ADHD. I didn't realize that for much of my life. It would have been nice to know. General awkwardness. Anyway, yeah, we got to know one another and become close friends. And then eventually, yeah, we're together.
It is amazing when you get late in life diagnoses like that, how much you're like, oh, that would have been really good to know.
Very helpful.
I've had a couple of those, honestly.
Yeah.
And Matt, your blog, you considered making it a bad movies blog at first before you then decided to make it an underrated movies blog, correct?
I don't remember this at all, but I'm prepared to believe you because I have a terrible memory. So.
Yeah. The story as I remember it is, when you were sort of in the wilderness, as it were, after your, anyway,
after the incident,
for anyone who's read Matt's book, he talks in the introduction about sort of how his screenwriting career seemed to have completely flamed out, and he was left wondering what to do next. And you decided that you were going to do this blog just to go ahead and keep writing and keep in thinking about movies. I don't know whether it was in the book or whether it was in the beginnings of your blog at the time. You said that you had considered making a bad movies blog because that would just be a fun thing to do. But then you were like, yeah, but I don't want to be reinforcing bad movies in my life. I want to be thinking about movies that actually are good, but people might not know about.
Yeah.
I do not remember this at all.
Really?
Okay. This is you made a good decision, Matt. I mean, like doing the Bad Movie Podcast has been a great business decision for me over my life, but it has made me watch a lot of stuff that I could have been doing more productive things with. And also, in a way, it's made me more like accepting of the world. Like I can find good in a lot of bad things. But, the older I get, the more uncomfortable I get with the idea of like, I'm making fun of all these things. Like I'm a creative person too. We've always tried to not be the jerk Bad Movie Podcast. Like it's just a jumping off point to like hang out and have fun. But that's, I think you made a soul enforcing decision.
Yes. Yes. So we should start transitioning to comics at some point. But you have also written comics. You and Stuart and Elliot have all had a chance to write comics indirectly spinning off of the Flophouse, correct?
Stuart and I have had less comics experience. Like Elliot's currently writing Harley Quinn for DC. He's a big shot. Stuart and I, we did some for charity Flophouse related sort of anthology comics that we sold, and it was for Puerto Rico hurricane repair, and then like something else at a different point. And then through that, we also met a comics editor where we all contributed to a Flash Gordon anthology that's exists out in the world. That's our comics experience. And as I said, like Elliot, he created his own Comic Maniac of New York that then Aftershock Comics went into bankruptcy. So eventually the third volume will come out, but he's done a lot of stuff.
Awesome.
Okay, so let's move into talking about some comics.
All right, so let's explain. We may have people who are listening to this podcast who have not listened to this podcast before because we have such a high-profile guest on. Let us explain what we do here. We are reading our way through Marvel Comics. We started in November 1961 with Fantastic Four #1. We are now up to July 1967. So this is really funny. We generally do 9 books a month, and we break them over 2 podcast episodes. Sometimes we have guests who come on and do all 9 with us, and sometimes we have guests who come on and do just the ones that most interest them. That's what we had Heidi McDonald do recently, and she picked a very idiosyncratic selection of books. Well, now we invited Dan on, and we asked Dan, what books do you want to cover? And he did the same 4 idiosyncratic books that Heidi did. So, Dan, you are going to get a very odd picture of the Marvel Universe in July 1967. There's a lot of Marie Severin, a lot of Dan Atkins, no Kirby. It's an interesting vision of the Marvel Universe that you're going to be looking at. But I think it's great. Did you enjoy reading these books, Dan?
I did. I mean, like there's some definitely that I'm like, well, this has more pep than others. There's certain stories that I found to be more of a slog, including, not to get ahead of ourselves, but my beloved X-Men, which was a comic that I did read most of the run of, at least, like the classic stuff through Claremont. I was like, this issue is not doing much for me, but I did have a good time.
It is much better than the previous couple of issues.
Really?
I can tell you that much. It is. Dan Atkins is a much better artist than Werner Roth. So you got a guest artist who was doing much better work. But
and Heidi had about the same reaction when she had picked X-Men. She's like, X-Men, yeah, I grew up reading X-Men. X-Men's awesome. Let's go see what the X-Men are up to. It's like, why did I make this decision? Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into The Amazing Spider-Man number 50, a nice anniversary issue. They don't really play it up too much, but obviously they have a cover on here that seems to recognize that this is a big milestone issue. The title says Spider-Man No More, and John Romita Sr. made an interesting design choice on here of having Peter Parker small in the foreground, trudging towards us with his head sagging, while Spider-Man is trudging away from us in the background, kind of looking over his shoulder. It's a fantastic composition, but not one that I think most people would have come up with.
So this is a very famous cover. I'm sure most of you can probably picture it, even if you're not used to reading these comics. Oddly enough, not as famous as the interior splash, which I think a lot of people misremember as being the cover of this issue.
I was about to say, I remember this cover now that I look at it, but in my head, it's of course the picture of him walking away from the trash can with his outfit in it.
Yes, which has been homaged on many covers later. There's, I remember growing up reading a Wonder Man issue where the cover was him walking away from his costume in a trash can. And because it's been homaged on so many other covers, people remember that as having been the cover of this issue, but it is not.
So, Spider-Man No More, Stan the Man Lee, Johnny Ring-a-Ding Romita invite you to join the capricious company of Mickey DeMeo Inker, of course that's Mike Esposito, and Sam Rosen letterer. Hang loose, hero. It's action time. So we start out with Spider-Man taking out a bunch of just sort of generic mobster goons. And at the end, one of the two people whom he saved from these folks is really afraid of him. They're like, the Daily Bugle says he's a menace. Don't come any closer. No. Right after, he just risked his life saving these two people. So he is thinking, why do I do this? We know that he does it because he's a good person and he wants to try to make people's lives better. He is starting to question whether or not it's just that he is addicted to the adrenaline, that this is an indulgence that he has that is not actually a net gain for the world, but is really a net gain for him, which is obviously not true. And we are going to see that play out as we go forward. But he keeps on getting all these different blows to his idea of him taking care of his responsibilities in the world. Aunt May has had another relapse of whatever the heck she has, some amorphous heart disease, apparently, it seems. Mrs. Watson is telling him that, she's been calling for you, Peter. And then he gets there and she, Mrs. Watson says as he walks off, because she's asleep, so she doesn't even get to see him. And she's like, stay close to the phone, Peter, And so he's like, oh, geez, okay, so I've been neglecting Aunt May. And then he goes to college and his professor takes him aside and he's like, Peter, you are one of the best students we have here, but you have been really coasting, and that is not what I expect from you, and you aren't really going to make it through college if you do this, no matter how smart you are.
And by the way, I'm secretly cloning both you and Gwen because I'm obsessed with both of you, but that won't be revealed for another 100 issues for the first of many clone sagas. But
yes.
What would you call that sweater that Peter is wearing here? Would that be considered a mohair sweater?
Okay, wait a minute. I was reading this issue, and we were going through a cold snap here, so we were all wearing multiple layers, in the house and out. And Amy has this sweater. My lovely spouse has this sweater. I mean, it's like a black and white kind of, kind of chaos pattern kind of thing. So that's what it is. That's what I would call this sweater, is the one that my lovely spouse has in her.
It's very furry. It's very furry. It's very woolly. It's some. I'm going to say mohair. I know there was something in the 60s called mohair, and that's what I'm going to guess this is.
Angora, maybe it could be Angora as well.
Maybe, I don't know.
I think the one in my house is just cotton, but yes, it has that same look in terms of just the. Oh, and by the way, one thing I didn't mention, we were reading the credits, is this is our first issue without John Romita Sr. inking himself in several issues, and I'm really pretty disappointed in this. Mike Esposito is not a bad inker, but I really think that such a famous and, retrospectively momentous issue really would have been just that much better if Romita had actually inked this himself.
Yeah, I agree.
So going back into, him not feeling like he is prioritizing things in his life correctly, Gwen asks him out and he says, well, I'm sorry, I can't go. And later he ends up lumping this into the whole thing of I shouldn't be Spider-Man anymore. Although this is really because I've been neglecting my aunt and I've been neglecting my studies, but I guess it all goes together. So he's, really down on this and really thinking he has the wrong priorities. And he gets home and Jameson is on the TV going through one of his usual rants, but this time he puts his money where his mouth is and puts down a $1,000 reward for the capture and conviction of Spider-Man. Now, the fact that there are no warrants out for him sort of makes me think this probably can't be legal, right? To just say, I am going to give a $1,000 reward for the capture of this person who has not been, there's no warrant out for. I'm pretty sure that would be kidnapping. One way or the other, Pete is just like, that's it. You know what? I always thought that he was just trying to sell papers and didn't believe this, but clearly he actually believes this. Such a cheap guy offering $1,000 to get me. It's maybe I am that bad. Maybe this was it. So he goes to an alley, of course, one of the many alleyways that New York City has, and then takes his costume and throws it in a trash can. Doesn't make sure to get it all the way in the trash can. It's very prominently hanging out. And this is that splash that you two were talking about. Now, usually he wears his costume under his clothes so that he can get into his costume very quickly and easily. And we see on the bottom of page 7, he is starting to remove his jacket. And then the next page, we see the costume is completely off of him and in the trash, and he's wearing his clothes. So did he do that thing where, like, a woman who's like, is like, the end of the day and they're just like, oh, I just need to take off my bra, but I don't want to take off my shirt. And they're somehow able to take their bra out from underneath their shirt. Or did he get completely buck naked here, or at least down to his tidy whities and then, or jockstrap. I mean, he clearly wears a cup based on all of the abuse that he gets. Did he get all the way down to his jockstrap to take this thing off or what? Your opinions.
You say somehow a woman does this. Now a bra, structurally has sort of one point of connection and is like a sort of a small thing that's then easily like unhooked and pulled out. This is confusing because as far as I can tell, this is essentially a onesie. So he must have gotten fully nude. And I do think that, like, it's fun. You mentioned, you make a joke, all of New York's alleys. New York, famously does not really, like, there's a couple, does not have alleys. It's always depicted as having alleys. But the Spider-Man, coming off of the trash, now that is accurate to New York. You can only assume that garbage is so full that this is the best he can do.
Still full of rotting food and all sorts of stuff. And this splash is actually one of the places where it really jumped out at me that John Romita was not inking himself on this. I really would have loved to see what this looked like had Romita inked himself on this. Also, this what does remind me, so once again, for people who are new here who might not have met any of us before, I was an inker primarily with the so-called Distinguished Competition over at DC for about 15 years, and I did a lot of work for Vertigo. There was one issue of Hunter, The Age of Magic. It was a Tim Hunter book drawn by one of my childhood comic book heroes, Rich Case, where there was a sequence where there was a character who was wearing headphones, and like wearing the headphones connected to a Walkman was very much part of the plot of what was going on. It was like protecting him from some kind of something. And then in the script, he had to take his shirt off. and Rich was like, wait, how am I going to pull? And in the end, you just use the comic book logic of it happened in the gutter. You didn't see it. You don't have to know what happened. Just you see him starting to pull it off. And then in the next panel, he has it off and the wire is still connected from his ear to his belt the whole time. Coincidence of coincidences. A kid finds the Spider-Man costume spilling out of this trash can. And his first thought is, hey, that J. Jonah Jameson guy probably give me lots of money if I bring this to him because he really is obsessed with Spider-Man. He goes running into the offices and where his parents are, I'm not sure, asks for a reward, and the reward is a free copy of the Daily Bugle on his way out. Now, somehow they decide, yes, this is actually Spider-Man's costume and not some high-quality costume shop job, but they figure out somehow that this is actually it. Jameson not only runs it on the front page, but goes on a whole media tour. We see him on, clearly, The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon here. Then we see a news roundtable talk show, like a Sunday morning news program sort of thing.
So this is supposed to be David Suskind's show.
Okay, I was wondering. Yeah. They make some very pointed jokes about this guy being conspicuously erudite, basically. Yeah. So I was wondering, it's like, is this like, I mean, it would have been before George Will, certainly. I'm like,
yeah, that was my first thought.
And then William F. Buckley was my second idea. But okay, Suskind. So then we see our first glimpse of Kingpin ever. And we just see him from behind, and he is taking the disappearance of Spider-Man to mean that it is time for him to move. There's a power vacuum now in the world of crime, now that Spider-Man isn't adding this pressure onto everything. And he's going to take advantage of this and try to consolidate his control over the mob. Now, he tells his lieutenant about this, and the lieutenant says, "Will do, Kingpin. We'll have a summit meeting that'll make Appalachian look like a tea party." So I had to go look up Appalachian. Did either of you know what that meant when you first saw it, or did you have to look it up as well?
Yes, I know.
I just kind of blip over these things. I'm like, it's a thing. It's a thing that I should know.
well, see, this is the kind of stuff that I love. This, because I was a history major in college, and I loved this kind of stuff where it's like, oh, what can this tell us about things? So when one of the mob bosses died, there was a big summit that was called among the other families, and it was in a town of Appalachian, New York, which was apparently where one of the mobsters had his country home. Unfortunately, these mobsters were not really thinking it through when they all showed up in their fancy limousines in this sleepy little town. Local law enforcement ended up raiding the thing. It was a huge embarrassment for J. Edgar Hoover, who had been dismissing the idea of a nationwide organized crime problem.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, we see Patch. Patch is the alter ego of Frederick Foswell, who was a mob boss who then went straight. And J. Jonah Jameson, one thing that you could very much say was a good thing about his character is he is willing to give an ex-con a second chance. And he hired Foswell on as a crime reporter, figured, well, this guy knows crime, he can do this, and seems to have really made a turn for good and was just, working as a crime reporter. Well, unfortunately, they have made the decision that he is going to also try to take advantage of this power vacuum here. When he comes up on the group of mobsters that he's trying to surveil on page 11, one of the mobsters says, "Hold it, punk. Where do you think you're going? This isn't your territory. Take a powder." Patch, so-called, says, "You know me. It's old Patch. I just want in on the action." And I will point out that Patch, his whole identity is a stool pigeon. Now, if you're trying to get information from criminals, having your identity be the stool pigeon is exactly the opposite of what you would want. That would be just as bad as saying, Patch, the undercover cop.
It's me, old Loose Lips. You know me.
Yes, indeed. Pete comes in just to tell Jameson that he is quitting because, of course, he's not going to have a way to get these photos anymore, and notices the costume framed in Jameson's office now. He tells him that he's quitting. We then see a close-up on Jonah's face as he is shocked and horrified that Pete is quitting, and Jameson, with his little rather unfortunate mustache there, staring straight at the camera, says, "I've been betrayed, stabbed in the back." And I'm like, ooh, I don't like that at all, that visual with that line. So anyway, there's a massive crime wave in the city. we see clearly that Gwen really does have a crush on Peter, and Peter is just too self-deprecating and socially awkward to recognize it. And
No, hold on. I I think it's really funny. Like in her thought balloon, she's like, "Why can't he see that I really like him?" But the things that she's saying are like, she's like, "Yeah, can you blame a girl for being really turned on by this other guy?" Like she's like actively being like, "Yeah, I'm so super into this other dude." It's like, why can't he see?
I think, especially in the way that Stan Lee tended to write women, is that like, oh, the way to get a guy to show interest in you is to make him jealous. And then meanwhile, Pete really is coming across like, me back in college, like the whole sort of thing of like, I don't know, man, I really like her, but she's just being friendly. I mean, it's not, it would be presumptuous of me to think that there is anything else there. Anyway, so Pete then does ask out Gwen, and she has a date with Harry because, of course, back in those days, good girls dated around. That's just one way the world is different now from the way it was then, as opposed to bad girls went steady. He then shows up and finds that MJ is there with his aunt. Meanwhile, his aunt is feeling better and doing other stuff. And he's like, wow, so I gave up being Spider-Man to go and concentrate on all this other stuff in my personal life. And these people don't actually need me. Everyone's doing just fine. He's like, okay, well, I'll go and study. Then he hears over the radio that there is this crime wave. And one of the things on here was we see a scene of the mobsters robbing something that is distributing welfare money. I'm not sure exactly what kind of office would then just have suitcases full of cash that they were handing out as part of government welfare. But he says, this money's for welfare. Yeah, the Kingpin's welfare. Now shut up and keep coding that case. Pete is just horrified. He's like, handicapped people, old people, helpless infants will be the sufferers, and they don't have bank accounts to fall back on while waiting for help. And he's about to start getting into his Spider-Man costume before realizing he doesn't have it on. I find this fascinating for two reasons. One, the idea that at that point, taking welfare money away from welfare recipients would be the absolute most dastardly thing to do, which does not seem to be the attitude for the last decades, most of my adult life. Yeah. And the other thing is that Steve Ditko in particular is an objectivist through and through at this point. And one of the things is that generosity and compassion actually lead to evil. Like they are corruptions of human society. And so the whole idea that his hero that he co-created and very much had a personal investment in would be thinking, oh, taking welfare away would be the worst thing in the world, really seems that would just be rubbing salt in the wound in some ways. Anyway, Pete is heading home and hears a robbery of some sort going on a rooftop, which is a little bit weird. But essentially, some crooks are about to throw a guard off of the rooftop, and Pete just can't stay by and do nothing. So he comes up, even though he doesn't have a mask, just tries to stay in the shadows, rescues the guy, and he's like, why did that guy remind me of something? What's going on? And then he realizes, wait, he looked like Uncle Ben. And then he goes through a rehash of his whole origin story and realizes, I was not doing this just for the thrill. I was doing this as, essentially penance for what I didn't do for Uncle Ben, and I will never forget that again. So he vows that he is now going to keep doing good stuff. Foswell, at this point, makes a really questionable decision to just waltz into Kingpin's office and be like, hey, Kingpin, remember me? I used to be called the big man, and I ran the mobs around here, and I've decided I'm going to do it again. So, you want to be my lieutenant? Like sitting here in the Kingpin's office, surrounded by the Kingpin's guards without any sort of crew of his own or anything like that. So, yeah, Kingpin just goes ahead and has him carted off.
Yeah. The Kingpin disintegrates Foswell's gun with the laser hidden in his cane. I don't think that stays.
Anyway, in the end, Peter Parker breaks into Jameson's office to steal back his costume, but instead of just stealing it and leaving, he decides to punk Jameson by being in his office waiting in his Spider-Man costume for him to come in and taunt him that... Yes, feet up on Jameson's desk and taunt him that he is going to go out and recruit new Spider-Mens. There will be a whole city worth of Spider-Men. And meanwhile, you're going to have to print retractions about me not being a superhero anymore because everyone's going to see me. Have a great day. And so then he swings out and he is renewed in his purpose. So I know that my synopsis there was a little bit longer than we've usually been trying to do of late, but this is a momentous issue, and there was a fair amount to talk about. So I was going to say I regret nothing, but that's because I haven't started editing the episode yet.
Yes.
So, Dan, what do you have to say about this issue?
Number one, I kind of found the mob stuff in it a little baffling, and it makes a little more sense to me now that I know that this is the Kingpin's first appearance. And also, I kind of imagined this having more impact. I must have read it at some point, and of course, I know how much like Spider-Man 2, the Raimi movie, draws on some of this, but it's wild to me how it's just like, oh yeah, I forgot my own origin story. There was a reason I was doing this. It doesn't feel like a super organic return to like, and now my vigor is renewed. My mission is important. You know, it's just like, oh, right. Uncle Ben. Okay, I'll get back to it.
Yeah, I'd forgotten how similar this was to Spider-Man 2, where in Spider-Man 2, he sort of quits and throws away his mask, and then Jameson ends up with the mask and has it pinned to his wall, and he has to get it back from him. I'd forgotten that all ends up in Spider-Man 2.
Oh, yeah. You know, I just found a Spider-Man 2 DVD in a crate somewhere here that I don't think I've ever taken out of the shrink wrap. And I was just thinking, wow, that is actually one of my favorite superhero movies of all time. Why is this, how did this end up here in this state?
I think as we get older, we still have our collector's instincts, but we have less time to indulge them.
So one question that I had is, this gets a little bit weird in terms of stereotypes, but because we're talking about mafia families in particular, and that's really what we were talking about with organized crime in this particular period of time, was Kingpin supposed to be another Italian mafia guy? What's your take on that?
I assume he's supposed to be Italian in this issue. That was my assumption. But they're certainly not making him broadly Italian.
Eventually, when they gave him a name, I think they were like, it'd be a little on the nose to go ahead and name him like,
Arthur Fonzarelli.
All right. Sure, why not? All right. And any other stuff either of you have to say about this?
I just wanted to call out one panel I enjoyed early on while he's fighting these sort of nameless goons. There's a panel where says like, they've raised the price of the corner drugstore. I have to save my webbing. So his solution is to trap them all by hitting a door over all of them. And I'm like, I don't know if this is a door like the ones we had in the house where I grew up, where it's hollow and it's just thin board over both sides. But I don't think it would enclose them the way that it's being shown, rather than just like kill all of them to slam a solid wooden door down on them.
Right. It would go one of two ways. Either it would kill them, or it would just break apart into a million pieces.
But I like that.
Yes, good point. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on and cover some other topics.
We'll try to get through this one a little quicker. Let's get through Strange Tales number 158 with Doctor Strange and Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., The Sands of Death. We have a cover with the Living Tribunal and Doctor Strange and an hourglass. This will all come up inside. But first, let's go ahead and cover S.H.I.E.L.D. Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., Supreme Headquarters, International Espionage Law Enforcement Division, Final Encounter. We're still in the middle of Nick's big battle with Baron Strucker with his Satan Claw. It says an Oscar-winning superstar spectacular by Stan Lee. He edited the script. Of course, Stan, you should not put yourself first if you merely edited the book, but okay. Oh, right. Well, then second on the list would be Jim Steranko. What did he do? He wrote and drew the script. You might also mention he inked it and possibly colored it as well. Sam Rosen, he lettered and lost the script. MGM wants them. MGM needs them. MGM can have them. Signed, Warner Brothers. This is absolutely amazing art here from Steranko on this whole issue, including the splash page. There are certain people at Marvel who are good at doing machinery in the background and certain people who are bad at it. I love Steranko's machinery in the background, which is absolutely crazy here, and might be too busy if he weren't coloring it himself, but I think he's doing a good job coloring it in a way that is fitting into the background. Strucker is throwing Fury around. They are wailing on each other in various ways. Remember, Fury managed to put together a gun out of his belt, which was quite impressive. Well, Strucker fuses the gun into a orb and drops it on the ground. This is really not much to describe. They're just fighting for 5 pages. Finally, on page 6, that good old belt again. Fury takes off the belt and uses it as a whip to whip the glove off the Strucker's hand.
That close-up of shirtless Nick Fury, just the bottom of his shirtless belly, as you just see the two hands unbuckling the leather belt. There's like all sorts of different unnerving stories that you could write from that could go in any number of different directions.
Well, you could cut this panel into, there is an infamous single-page silent sex scene that's going to be coming up in Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. soon, so we could cut that into there, but we're not going to. So then we get on page 7, another one of these Steranko splash pages in which the perspective points make no sense. So we have Nick Fury still shirtless, surrounded by Hydra goons as they're all firing and missing him, and he is jumping through a plate glass something into some sort of round tunnel. The perspective makes no sense, as it never does in Steranko, which is just fine. You never care. It never makes sense, and you never care because it's always gorgeous. Then he jumps in some water. They're firing down in the water, and they're like, well, he hasn't come up. Clearly he's dead. Anyway, moving on.
And that's a fantastic panel where he's dived into the water and the bullets are coming into the water after him. And Steranko just really is, I mean, that is just a stunning, stunning panel.
But then it turns out that Fury is like, nope, I didn't die. And I knocked out one of your Hydra goons and I put on his Hydra uniform. Well, wait, so he had a Hydra mask on over his Fury mask. Well, wait, you have no idea how many masks are going to be involved from this point on. Because at this point, a bunch of Hydra goons come in the room.
Mission Impossible 2.
Yes. A bunch of Hydra goons come in the room and Fury is fighting Strucker. But they are both wearing the same Hydra pants at this point. They're both bare-chested. They both look like they have Strucker's head and Monocle. And they're like, oh, what's going on, dude? And one of the two Struckers is like, you fool, I'm fighting Fury, but he's wearing a mask to look like me. And the other one's like, no, you fool, it's him. And so then the Hydra goons believe one of them, grab one of them, pull off the Strucker mask to reveal it really is Fury. This is Fury underneath the Strucker mask. And so then they all shoot that one. And the one who still looks like Strucker is getting away, says, oh, by the way, let me take the damsel in distress who is here, and let me go ahead and leave with her and leave you guys run into Hydra City. This will all be fine. Goodbye. He leaves. He then takes off his Strucker mask. Well, it turns out that he managed to put a Strucker mask on himself, and on Strucker, he put both a Fury mask and a Strucker mask. So he was Strucker plus Fury plus Strucker. And keep in mind that both of these Struckers have monocles on, and Fury has an eye patch. Now, this would make somewhat sense if only the monocle and the eye patch were on the same side of the head, but they're on opposite sides of the head. So what was
intriguing point you make?
Yes. Well, I mean, we have discussed so many times in this that mask technology in the Marvel Universe does not compute in our universe. Like, our universe cannot comprehend just the mundane, ho-hum, everyday mask technology that exists in the Marvel Universe.
Yes.
And you talk about, last time you talked about things like happening between the panels when we're talking about the Spidey thing. Like, this is like a real, like, between the panels thing. Like, when Fury explains it, I'm like, what? And I went back and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess the panel says like a few minutes later. So there was time for all this mask shenanigan stuff to happen off screen.
Never go back, Dan. Never go back.
Okay. We did not have you read for this episode the Daredevil this month. So Matt Murdock is playing Mike Murdock, who is dressed up as Daredevil, who is then dressed up as Thor, with his sunglasses on the bottommost layer, then his Daredevil mask on top of that, and then a Thor mask on top of that. So this is not the worst one of those this month.
So then Fury, no longer looking like Strucker, is escaping with the damsel in distress, the daughter of the former Supreme Hydra. Gorgeous Hydra Island in the background. Meanwhile, back on Hydra Island, the Hydra goons are like, Strucker seems to have abandoned us, but at least we have this Death Spore bomb that's about to go off on the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. You know, this one right here. It's about to go off on the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. It's this one right here. Wait just a second. It goes off and completely fries the inside of Hydra Island, killing everyone in Hydra. And the art of the spore full of curry crackle destroying the island is absolutely gorgeous. And then Fury and Laura Brown leave, and that is the end of this massive storyline. So we've already talked about it a little bit. Dan, did you have anything else to say about this issue?
I mean, it was mostly that I just adore this like double fake out that is so dumb. Like twice within the space of like a couple of pages, it's like, oh no, I'm alive. I did this other thing that you didn't see. but also, yeah, I'm glad that you talk about the artwork because I love it too. But the anatomy on these people, the twists and turns they do, the distortions of the foreshortened bodies. It is like if Fletcher Hanks could draw. That's what this is. I feel like
it's Fletcher Hanks with talent.
Yeah.
We should explain that
stuff.
for those who don't know, that Fletcher Hanks was considered to be one of the worst comic books artists of all time. And he did very much beloved but bizarre comics, including Phantoma and all these bizarre comics he did back in the 40s and 50s. Stardust. Yes. Steve, what did you have to say?
The credits with that whole thing about MGM wants them, MGM needs them, MGM can have them signed Warner Brothers. I mean, that seems, I'm guessing, to be some sort of reference to spy movies of the time. But it is, of course, supremely ironic that Warner Brothers has owned DC Comics for the last couple of decades.
Yeah.
Yeah. At one point when Strucker is going on and on about himself, Nick Fury comes up behind him and says, "No kidding, pal. You must have been taking modesty lessons off of Cassius Clay," which I found interesting. And I did go and look it up, and he had not been Cassius Clay for at least 3 years at this point. Well, I guess at least 2 years. So that's interesting. In terms of the technology and the background, it is certainly unique. One of the things about it is it doesn't really seem to have any dimension to it, in that he's got some stuff on there that's similar to how Don Heck does some of his machinery, in that you have lots of these grids that then have kind of little triangles inside them to sort of indicate shadow. But here it just looks like a pattern and nothing else. It doesn't really seem to have any shadow and depth to it. And also, as an inker, I'm sitting here thinking that is a lot of work to fill in all those little alternating black and white rectangles and triangles and have it look clean. I mean, a lot of work.
As we discussed in the past, Steranko only ever did 32 comics, so he burned himself out pretty quick.
Right. Well, at least 32 Marvel comics, right? So just a couple other panels to call out. Page 10, that panel right in the middle as what looks like Fury, but we later find out is actually Strucker getting fried in the alpha particle reactor cube. And with all of that zipatone and then the sort of implied holding lines around parts of the outside of the drawing of his body, and the way the shadow and the light is working in there is just absolutely stunning. I could not love that panel more. And then also in terms of Steranko's innovations in terms of how to visually represent things in comics, on page 11, that panel in the middle where the ship is leaving Hydra Island, much to the confusion of everyone else in Hydra, who's like, but isn't everyone out in the outside world about to get killed by the death spore? And it's like, okay, well, he's insisting on leaving. But notice how it's flying away, and Steranko has had this subtle effect of white zipatone over the black inked background with a circle cut out of the white zipatone, indicating the hole in the force field that's going to protect Hydra Island from the spore, they think. It's very subtle. I'm surprised that Stan Lee didn't say, go back and indicate this more. But it works really nicely once you figure out what's going on.
Yeah. I'll just add one last thing. I like how Nick Fury is so proactive in this story and in this whole storyline. Like, it's very tempting as a writer to get in a place where you're like, oh, you know, we're at the very last second of the storyline and the villain has been 10 steps ahead of the hero the whole time. And the hero, he's really behind the 8 ball now. There's nothing he can do now. And instead, like, no, Fury has been 10 steps ahead of Strucker almost this whole time. It's still a huge fight. It's still a very hard thing to do. But Fury has been very smart and clever and outsmarting Strucker this whole time. And it's really hard way to write that way without just making everything going against your hero all the time. And I think it's really well written. I think it's really beautifully written. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the back half of the book. Doctor Strange, Master of the Mystic Arts, The Sands of Death, a legendary issue. Stan Lee prestigiously presents a Roy Thomas Marie Severin talismanic tour de force, inked once again by Herb Trimpe, doing a very good job again, lettered by Artie Simek, Mystic Masters all. So I think that really Trimpe's inking on this book looks exactly like Severin's own inking, which is high praise. I think it's really nice. We pick up where we left off last issue. So keep in mind, Doctor Strange had originally, 10 issues ago, been fighting Kalu'u, and then Kalu'u had been like, oh, I have to leave because now an even more menacing menace has arrived, Umar. And then he fought Umar for several issues, and then Umar said, oh, now I have to leave because an even more menacing menace named Zom has arrived. And then he fought Zom for several issues, and then Zom was like, I have to go, the Living Tribunal has arrived. And I'm like, okay, you're sort of repeating yourself here, and also, this is all one day. Like, this is all a hell of a day for Doctor Strange as he has to fight these escalating menaces. So
and let me point out, with Steranko being in the first half of the book, when I spoke with him at Heroes Con, one of the claims that he made was he was the first one to have a year-long storyline in a comic book, with the storyline that I believe begins next issue. As you just pointed out, this is the second Doctor Strange storyline that we've had that has lasted, if not a full year, then almost a year. Now, I did not ask him to elaborate on why that one didn't count.
Good.
He told me why Will Eisner's A Contract with God did not count as the first graphic novel, so he could claim he did the first graphic novel. But I did not ask him for details on this one. But I just want to point out, this is the second one that has happened in the exact same book that Steranko was working on,
Yes.
despite his claim.
Poor Doctor Strange, in a tough spot. His mystic flying cloak has been destroyed and is burning. He is facing the Living Tribunal, an absolutely gorgeous design from Marie Severin, as we talked about last issue, looking a lot like a Ditko or Starlin design. This golden man who has three faces, one unhooded, one half-hooded, and one completely hooded. They explain that one is the face of equity, a word we use a lot more these days. One is the face of revenge, and one is the face of necessity. None of them like Doctor Strange, and they are all here to destroy the planet Earth. Poor Marie Severin has to draw so many interesting things here. He's like, yes, I've been to every different dimension, and Marie Severin has to do a little collage of what different dimensions look like. And he says, and I've dealt with every type of sorcerer, and she has to do a collage of what different sorcerers look like. And neither of those things are easy to do. And he's like, look, you releasing Zom has ruined the planet Earth. So everyone who could have become an evil sorcerer now is an evil sorcerer. And we cut to a humble druggist who is suddenly realizing he is now an evil sorcerer and is loving it. And then he's pointing out, again, a nice little montage, a nice little collage, I should say, of evil people all around the Earth realizing that they are now evil sorcerers. And he's like, the only solution is to destroy the Earth. And then we get to page 6, a huge splash page of a bunch of copies of the planet Earth and other planets being sucked into a swirling galaxy, sort of, with Living Tribunal and Doctor Strange. And this was later turned into the cover of the second Pink Floyd album, A Saucer Full of Secrets, heavily repainted. You have to sort of squint to see that Doctor Strange and the Living Tribunal are both on the Pink Floyd album cover, and it's more easy to see all the planets being sucked into the galaxy. Do you guys have copies of this? Can you take a look at this?
I'm trying to call it up right now.
By the way, I think in the story, I think it says that this is a vision of Earth either coming out of creation or being drawn into its destruction, that these are all images of Earth, I think, as it is destroyed. Oh, yeah, I see the planets there. Oh, yeah, there's the Living Tribunal.
Doctor Strange is on the right. That's Doctor Strange on the right.
Yeah, he's sort of further over than he would be in, the splash page, but I can see the vague image of him.
Yeah, so this was a huge compliment. Obviously, the psychedelic revolution had been fueled by Ditko's original Doctor Strange comics, and it wasn't just Ditko. Now they were grooving on Marie Severin, and they were turning her art into extremely psychedelic album covers for legendary psychedelic albums. So a huge compliment to Maria. I don't know how she felt about it. I don't know if she made any money off of it. I would assume not. I don't know if even Marvel made any money off of it. I would assume not. But still a huge compliment. So Doctor Strange is fighting the Living Tribunal. They are zonking each other in various ways. Living Tribunal is like, look, if you were any good, you would be able to reconstitute your cloak of levitation, but you can't. And Doctor Strange, I didn't think he had this much power, but he does. He manages to reconstitute it. And Living Tribunal is like, I'm going to destroy the Earth anyway. We noticed before when Doctor Strange was fighting Umar that she looked a lot like the Wicked Witch of the West, and her flying monkeys looked a lot like the flying monkeys from The Wizard of Oz, and her castle looked a lot like that. Well, obviously, Marie Severin, big fan of The Wizard of Oz, because then the Living Tribunal says, I will destroy you in 1 hour. But first, I will set this little hourglass going. And as the hourglass sands tick away, so ticks away your life, and I will come back to destroy you in an hour. This is right out of The Wizard of Oz, and this is where poor Doctor Strange finds himself at the end of the issue. Dan, what did you think of this issue?
I mean, the main thing for me was the gorgeous art. Like, I texted you, Matt. I was very proud of myself. I'm like, this reminds me of like EC art. I wonder if there's a relation. And of course, she did coloring and cleanup art for EC. And to me, I saw it the most in like these little, as you say, like there's these collages of various things. And when you see like these little evil wizards being born all over the panel, it felt sort of like, I don't know, things writhing in a horror comic in the background. It's all It's all really beautiful. I was interested in picking this because the MCU version is very different, I know, than what is in these comics. But that's sort of how I backed into knowing a little bit more about Doctor Strange. When I was a kid, I was like scared or put off by anything too cosmic. I'm like, well, I understand superheroes. I understand Spider-Man. He has spidery powers and he's a human being. Whereas this stuff, I'm like, I don't know, there's something mysterious and far out and perhaps druggy about it. And now I don't know whether it's the widespread legalization of marijuana that has made me respond to these more. Also, I think I can put it in a context of culturally, like, okay, things were getting this way in pop culture. Like, people wanted stuff that was like far out, man.
Yeah.
And I love to look at this now. It's so imaginative.
Yeah, I'm glad you like it. I'm just a huge fan of the art in this issue. Steve, what do you think of it?
Once again, the Living Tribunal looks really super interesting in that I don't know what the decision was behind making his hands like flat mittens. They look like somebody had a sheet of clay and then cut out a mitten shape from it, and then that's its hand, which is a little bit odd. And I love the fact that his triple-faced head is floating over his shoulders. From what I understood here, and once again, lots of these stories can be a little bit hand-waving, like, what just happened? But it's fine. But it seems that somehow setting Zom free, as you said, all these different sorcerers are now realizing their latent sorcerer power, and that Living Tribunal is like, look, every dimension had one sorcery master. You can see that Dormammu is one of them there. But now all of these people are going to end up being like that. And if they end up joining forces, essentially they could go and destroy all of the realities. In the end, when Strange has earned a little bit of his respect, he then says, okay, you know what? I still think I'm going to have to destroy the Earth, but I'm going to give you 1 hour to fix the problem. And it's not clear whether that means capture Zom or whether that means do something about all of these magical people who've just popped forward. It's unclear what that means. But I just wanted to clarify that a little bit more. I reread it this morning just to make sure I understood it, because I don't think I did the first time. Again, the art is certainly unique. It's something that probably wouldn't have jumped out at me as a kid. You know, I probably would have been like, this just looks sort of old-fashioned. But I can definitely recognize just how amazing this is these days.
One last thing is that there is a letter in the back from Bill Mantlo, who has written letters in the past. He would go on to become one of my favorite comic book writers. And it's a great letter. You would worry that he would be like, why is there a woman drawing this comic? I don't like women. And then, you would be like, oh, never meet your heroes. But no, he's great. He's like, Stranko's art is amazing. But the brunt of my letter has to do with the senses staggering sketches of Marie Severin. He says, I've seen Marie's work in Esquire, and you couldn't have found a better artist for Doctor Strange. So good old Bill Mantlo is on the right side of history here. So yes, I'm happy to see that.
And once again, for the folks who might be listening to this show for the first time, Bill Mantlo, most known to the public for co-creating Rocket Raccoon, but then he also wrote Hulk for many, many years.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to Tales to Astonish number 93 with the Incredible Hulk and Submariner. Why don't you take it and go, Steve?
Speaking of the Hulk, so the cover is a Hulk cover, and we see the Silver Surfer is in it. He is carrying the Hulk away from a massive amount of flames, and the Hulk does not look particularly happy about it. He Who Strikes the Silver Surfer is the title.
Let's go ahead and do Submariner first.
So, Prince Namor the Submariner, the Monarch, and the Monster. Last issue, we had a really interesting setup where this radioactive engine of death called It, that looks sort of like the Thing, but more like a human being, sort of a rough, rocky orange hide, Essentially, both Namor and the Americans in their subs thought that it was a tool of the other one, and there was rising tensions, and each one was blaming the other one for stuff that it was doing. Really nice setup for this three-way battle that everyone thought was a two-way battle. Smilin' Stan Lee imperiously presents a sub-oceanic struggle of monumental magnitude by rascally Roy Thomas and dapper Dan Adkins. Oh, yes, and for you credit completists out there in Marvel land, it was lettered by adorable Artie Simek. Of course, they're not complete credits because they do not mention the colorist, as they never yet have at this point in Marvel history. That will not be for another few years, I guess. So, Submariner and It are having a knockdown, drag-out fight. Submariner thinks that he has left It crushed by a cascade of boulders and stones, but in a scene very reminiscent of the Spider-Man Master Planner storyline, probably the most famous sequence of Ditko's run on Spider-Man of all time, we have very much an homage to that. Now, being Dan Adkins, I went back and looked to make sure it wasn't actually swiped, and it does not look like it is. But definitely seems very similar.
Dan Atkins will have two terrible swipes later on in this issue, but huge credit to Dan Atkins for homaging here without actually swiping Spider-Man, lifting the boulder off his head.
Yes, although in that case, that was a very heroic moment for Spider-Man, whereas here, It is just thinking, kill, kill, kill! Submariner, once again, thinking that It was part of the Americans' attack on Atlantis, goes up to attack the submarine, now that he thinks he's taken care of It, actually punches a hole through the skin of the submarine. I don't know that much about submarines, but I'm pretty sure that would mean that the thing is probably about to completely collapse, but people don't seem to be as worried about it as I would think. Turns out It didn't get completely crushed and makes it back up to the submarine and continues the fight. Submariner is eventually able to knock him once again through the skin of the submarine, where presumably water is just gushing in, but hey, everything seems to be, it's fine, we'll get to the surface in a little bit. But at this point, it's clear that It is actually very radioactive. So Submariner starts to succumb to radiation poisoning. Oh, and there's some reference here to the Americans thinking that they were fighting a radioactive Submariner. It says, for clarity's sake, we should point out again that the Swabbies mistook It for a radioactive Namor, which I do not remember that being what happened last issue, but it could be that I missed something. It could be they're just retrospectively trying to explain stuff. So Submariner is not doing well from this radiation poisoning, and he almost collapses down to the bottom of the sea, and while he's down near the bottom of the sea, he sees this really big, beautiful octopus. Wow, that looks like Dan Adkins put a lot of thought and imagination into this just one background element on this panel. That's amazing, Dan Adkins.
I feel a rug pull coming.
Yes, that is taken directly from a panel of Prince Valiant by Hal Foster. Apparently, there is some incident where there was a giant octopus that was down at the bottom of a well or something like that in Prince Valiant. That is a line-for-line recreation of that octopus.
And then later, there was a whole Brian Cronin article in Comics Should Be Good about how a later writer was like, that was a giant octopus that did not become a story element. We should bring that giant octopus back and actually write a story about it. And then people were like, dude, he was just swiping Prince Valiant. It's not a story element. You don't have to do a story about it. And then later someone was like, no, we must do a story about that.
If I remember correctly, that was actually Roy Thomas who wrote that follow-up story.
Yeah.
Also, Matt, you know how we've talked about in the past when Wally Wood did his brief stint at Marvel that he really should have been doing Namor. And we saw the brief glimpse of him drawing Atlantis and Namor in one of the Daredevil issues he did. Another Brian Cronin article I ran across as I was doing this search said that that was actually the plan, but that the relationship between Wood and Lee blew up before it could happen, which is just such a shame.
Such a shame. And you can tell
would have been amazing.
You can tell from this issue it's a shame. I don't know if Adkins and Wood ever worked in the same studio, but it looks like they did because Adkins' work on this issue is very similar to Wood. I feel like this issue sort of gives us a glimpse of what it could have been like if Wood had done the book.
I thought I'd read that they had. Wood famously said, never draw when you can copy, never copy when you can swipe, never swipe when you can just cut out and paste up. And supposedly Adkins took that a little too much to heart. Okay, so now going to He Who Strikes the Silver Surfer, Hulkily presented by Smilin' Stan Lee and Mirthful Marie Severin, Masters of Hulkology, Hulkamorously inked by Frank Giacoia, Hulkifically lettered by Artie Simek. In the previous issue, Silver Surfer had shown up kind of out of nowhere and ended up knocking Hulk for a loop. I still am a little bit unclear on exactly why he showed up and why this whole thing started. But Hulk becomes convinced that Silver Surfer could take him, Hulk, away from the Earth so that he wouldn't have to worry about humans attacking him all the time. Silver Surfer is like, dude, I really wish I could help you, but I can't.
Yes, at this point, even human beings can make it into outer space, but the one person on the entire planet Earth who absolutely cannot go into space is the Silver Surfer. You have chosen the worst possible person to send you into space because there is a force field surrounding the Earth he cannot get out of.
Yes. So this is at least the third time, if not more, that we have seen the New York City Flamethrower Squad, which, again, is a horrifying idea. Now, granted, in a world with supervillains, I can kind of understand it a little bit more, but I remember a history class that I took with a professor. I was taking a Roman history class from him, but he also taught history of Vietnam, and he would always talk about how in modern warfare, the flamethrower guy would always be the first one to be shot, just because it was just so horrifying. And no, we can't let you do that. So the New York Police Department actually has an entire flamethrower squad, and they move in and they're trying to entrap the Hulk basically with a ceiling of flame. And Silver Surfer's like, you know what? Humans suck. And if they hate the Hulk this much, he must not be such a bad guy. So I'm going to go rescue the Hulk. So he comes in, takes him off. Hulk still keeps on just trying to batter Surfer into submission to take him into outer space. At one point steals the Silver Surfer's board. The Silver Surfer is like, yeah, dude, I'm the only one who can control that. So the Silver Surfer is able to go into the Hulk's mind and sort of see what's in there, sees the tragedy that befell Bruce Banner that turned him into the Hulk, and he's about to use the power cosmic to remove all of the gamma-ness from his body to then end the Hulk forever and just let him be Bruce Banner. But then Hulk comes to and fights off the Silver Surfer, and the Silver Surfer's like, fine, I'm trying to do a nice thing. This is what happens. I'm out of here. So that's pretty much the end of the story. I will point out the fact that Silver Surfer and Hulk will years later become co-founding members of the Defenders, and this is the first time that they have met each other. These two supremely powerful beings.
They made up. That's nice to know.
Yes, eventually the Hulk learned to love beans, at which point they were able to live in peace.
In one of the first great Mantlo Hulk issues from his run of the book, clearly homage to this one, where once again the Silver Surfer almost cures the Hulk. No, well, that's right. It's the opposite in that one. In that case, the Hulk almost helps the Silver Surfer get off planet, and then it falls apart at the last second. So that's sort of an homage to this one. What did you think, Steve or Dan, of Giacoia on Severin? This issue looks very different from the Doctor Strange issue we read, which was Trimpe inking Marie Severin. Here we have Giacoia inking Severin. What do you think of it, Steve?
I liked it, but yeah, as you said, it's quite different. It's a little bit smoother. It doesn't have quite the rough edge that Marie has when inking herself, or that Herb was bringing to it. But I think it works. Yeah, I don't have strong feelings.
The other issue, as far out as it is, it also, I think you alluded to it, Steve. It has like an old timiness to it, and I like that. I like how I think there's a level of like real obsessive craft and skill to some of the really old illustration work that I enjoy, but it can feel maybe a little fussy or less dynamic, and this feels more of the time of the other things that I've seen. That's my vibe on it. I don't know, what do you think, Matt? You seem like you disagree.
I feel like it's much cruder. I feel like, I think of Giacoia as being a more sophisticated inker than Trimpe, but it's the opposite this month. I think this issue looks good. I'm not a huge fan of Severin's Hulk face. Hulk faces are a big part of Hulk comics, but I like her Silver Surfer and I like her Hulk body. I like this issue. It's they're stretching Severin thinner than they used to stretch her when she was just doing Doctor Strange. Now she's doing both these books. But I think this is a nice book. Really sort of touching final page of the Hulk reaching out as Silver Surfer flies away and wishing he could go to the stars. Still not understanding that the Silver Surfer cannot go to the stars, but wishing that he could go with him. I think it's kind of a touching issue. I think it's quite good.
I was touched. We didn't really talk much about the Namor one, but that's fine with me because that one felt like a slog personally to me. But this one did make me feel something at the end, although it made me feel something in a way that was so frustrating. Like, oh, what are you doing? Like, oh, you were about to fix me, but I don't know. Get out of here. Like, and Hulk is not known for his measured, reasoned responses. It all makes sense, but I found myself continually getting frustrated in a good dramatic way with the characters in this. I picked this one to talk about because, again, like a cosmic character I didn't know a lot about. I would be like to my brothers, like, what's the deal with the Silver Surfer? And they'd be like, oh, he's the Herald of Galactus. I'm like, what is that? That doesn't clear anything up for me.
This issue does fall into the same problem of every different issue. The question of what does the Hulk want is different. Sometimes the Hulk is like, I want friends. I will go to New York and try to find the Avengers. And it's like, okay, well, that's a different thing than you've ever wanted before. Sometimes the Hulk is like, I just want to be left alone. Sometimes the Hulk is like, I want a cure. And in this issue, the Hulk wants to get off planet. That is his number one goal. And I'm like, okay, that's a new goal for the Hulk.
He's gonna make it eventually.
Yes, yeah.
True. But that was like, more fool eye for expecting the Hulk to be reasonable. But I'm like, you seem like you've got like this real monomania Hulk. Maybe the Silver Surfer can help you in a different way that's not getting you off planet if he says he can't do that. But, it's the Hulk.
It's the Hulk. What you gonna do? Okay, let's go and move on to our final book of this episode, X-Men number 34, War in a World of Darkness. And we have a pleasant surprise. Instead of the typically terrible penciling of Werner Roth, which we usually get on this book, we have more Dan Atkins. We just had Dan Atkins and Namor, and now we've got Dan Atkins penciling and inking himself over here in X-Men as well. So quite a stretch for Dan Atkins this month to go up to penciling and inking a book and a half, which is more than most Marvel artists ever do. We've never had anybody, I think, penciling and inking more than one book a month before. This is War in a World of Darkness. Of course, Dan Atkins has to take some shortcuts in order to accomplish it, as we will see. But the X-Men are repairing Cerebro, which has been wrecked yet again, as they point out here. Whoever absconded with Xavier also had time to wreck our just repaired Cerebro. So acknowledging that it gets wrecked a lot. Marvel Girl quickly goes back. We see her roommate for the first and only time. Remember, she's still going to college.
Well, before she heads back to college, she is telling the other two X-Men, Angel and Bobby, who are not working on repairing Cerebro, that they need to go get some food and some rest so that they will be ready to go if need be. And then she says, now, you and Bobby have a bite to eat and get some rest before I take you over my knee telekinetically. And they're like, ooh, you just talked us into it, Jeannie. Yeah, don't threaten them with a good time.
Yeah. So then she stops off, sees her roommate. Roommate says, oh, you've been getting all these calls from, once again, Ralph and Ted, these two people she keeps running into trouble with. This is Ted calling her to tell her that Ralph has been kidnapped by Tyrannus deep under the ground, or he has been sucked down into a hole in the ground, and now they have to go investigate. He's been doing some earth boring, which is, we've discovered in a recent Iron Man issue, always gets you into trouble.
It's a very boring issue of X-Men.
Yes, lots of boring, as opposed to if they were actually trying to attach things together, and then it would be a riveting issue of X-Men.
That's right.
They go ahead to the hole in the ground, find out the whole story, find out that Tyrannus has been, sorry, I keep forgetting exactly what's going on in this issue, but I'm trying my best to do it. They eventually end up going into the ground after Tyrannus. We get a no prize book panel where Jean and Warren and Bobby are guiding the ship into the ground. It actually says Warren Worthington's automobile know-how serves him in good stead. So they've just said his name is Warren Worthington, but then Jean calls him Scott. I'll keep you advised on depth reading Scott. I never quite buy it in any sort of fiction where someone has an earth-boring machine that goes at like fast speed. It's unbelievable enough when you've got like an earth-boring machine that's going towards the core of the earth at all,
Right.
but hey, we've all seen Total Recall. We've all seen
The Core?
the sort of, so I've never seen the movie The Core. This is your business, Dan. If there's one person on the planet Earth who has ever seen The Core, it's got to be you.
I mean, I don't know where you stand on really dumb disaster pictures, but I love The Core. I mean, it's got Tucci, I believe, is in it. It's got Delroy Lindo. It's got classy supporting actors with some of the silliest, dopiest ideas. I recommend it as a goof.
I've always heard it's a lot of fun. I do like goofy disaster movies, but correct me if I'm wrong. In that movie, they're like moving fast down through the ground to the core of the earth, correct?
Yes, they're burrowing fast. They have like some sort of, I don't know, like laser, or they've got something that really just destroys matter immediately, and they're moving fast.
Well, right here is that they're using frontal lasers to go ahead and dive down into the earth as fast as possible. However, once they're down into the cave, they are stopped by running into a stalactite. Stalagmite. Very specific, stalagmite. Why the stalagmite would stop them when, miles of rock and Earth's crust would not, I do not know.
Well, maybe it's like in The Core when I believe they hit a layer of diamonds or something like that. Maybe that's what's going on.
Sure.
Who knows?
They get to an underground chamber. They run into the Mole Man. So once again, we've got a Mole Man versus Tyrannus storyline where we have surface heroes getting caught up in the war between them. Mole Man has his Moloids attack, which are not to be confused with Tyrannus's Tyrannoids, who seem like they are a slightly different version of the same thing.
I've always assumed that they're just two different nationalities of the same species.
Yeah.
However, we do see the Tyrannoids can actually speak here, and I do not think we've ever seen the Moloids speak. However, both Tyrannus and Mole Man treat their minions horribly.
Yes.
Unneedlessly horribly.
But then our three X-Men, Jean, Poppy, and Warren, run into a river that takes away their memories, that wipes their minds, the River Letha. They now don't remember who they are. Meanwhile, Tyrannus is forcing Ralph to build a giant gladiator-type robot, and I really like it a lot. It reminds me of the giant robot in the movie Jason and the Argonauts. It's got a sword, it's got a shield, it's quite badass. And of course, it's covered in rivets to make sure we know it's metal. Meanwhile, Scott and Hank are coming down into the core of the earth, trying to figure out what happened to the other X-Men.
Because they left a note.
They left a note. Good. Always leave a note. We find out that Mole Man also is creating a giant sword-wielding robot, but his is made of diamond. I really like the look of these two robots. I see them and I instantly go like, I want these two robots to fight each other, and they do. And I am a happy man. Second Notorious Atkins swipe of the month on page 14, where we have Mole Man reaching out to control some levers, and it is an exact swipe from the cover of Fantastic Four number 31.
Huh.
Go look up the cover of Fantastic Four 31.
Ah, yes, there it is right there. Mole Man at some controls. Yeah, line for line.
Line for line. I will go ahead and skip to the end of this book. The two giant sword-wielding robots get to fight each other for several pages. It looks very awesome. The five X-Men finally meet up with each other. Everybody's memory is restored. They finally manage to get back to the surface. And then, whoops, Tyrannus and Mole Man's memories get erased, and they have no idea who they are or what they're doing. I would still think they would end up fighting each other fairly quickly. I would think that Mole Man's Moloids might arrive to help him, and Tyrannus's Tyrannoids might arrive to help him, and the hostilities might erupt fairly quickly again. But that's where the issue leaves off. Next issue, would you believe, Spider-Man. So, Dan, what did you think of this issue? You've already previewed that you're not the biggest fan of it.
I got a little sleepy reading this. I don't know whether it was just that it was the final one. I think, like I said before, I read some of these earlier X-Men that my brothers had in reprints, but I mostly read the Claremont years. And what I like about X-Men or various X titles is the soap opera quality of a lot of it. And it's kind of weird to me that these early issues in some ways seem to remember that these are all students who go to school more than later ones do, but have less soapiness. Like I always just liked the, goofy interpersonal like drama that always flared up. And there's not a lot of drama. This is a fighting comic. There's something about mole people as antagonists that has never done much of anything for me beyond, possibly the Time Machine. And maybe it's just like most of the time, I don't think a lot of thought has been put into it other than they live beneath the ground. Like, yeah, but what else? What about them? Like, why do they care? What's going on?
What do they want? What is their motivation?
Yeah, that's kind of my feeling.
One thing about,
Yeah.
you were talking about the lack of soapiness in here. Matt and I just talked about how, what is it, last issue or 2 issues ago, they sort of wrapped up both of the love triangle type aspects that we'd had in here. So really the only one that's sort of still there is Jean with Scott and Ted. But they don't really seem to be playing that up at all.
Who's Ted?
Ted in the book, in the story here, the one who called Jean and said, "Hey, my brother's been napped."
I like as a single issue, I'm like, oh, this is just some guy. I didn't think this was a significant character.
No, this is a guy who clearly is interested in her, but the whole thing about Warren being interested in Jean has been wrapped up because he has now met Candy Southern. They've gotten rid of that, and clearly, as you note, that is something they should not have gotten rid of necessarily.
Well, if the Warren Scott Jean love triangle was still going, then presumably it would hurt his feelings quite a bit to have her call him Scott. But that's maybe in a clinch, it would be even more painful. Like, oh, Scott. No, it's me. It's Warren.
Right. Just a couple other things. Jean is going to Metro College, which is theoretically the same college that Johnny Storm goes to, although he seems to just unceremoniously just stop going around now-ish. I've always assumed that is more or less analogous to CUNY, I guess they call it, CUNY, the City University of New York. I'm guessing based on the panel where the X-Men come and pick her up, right after she went back to college, and then she immediately has to go back and rejoin the X-Men later that night. So on page 3, the final panel, look at how bucolic and isolated that area is. And she's just like on the edge of her college campus in New York City. Right? I'm guessing that CUNY probably has a campus up in the Bronx, which, so the North Bronx or something like that, which would make sense since she's coming down from Westchester. Yeah, and I really like a lot of the textures and the shadows and stuff that Dan Adkins brings to this stuff. It really has kind of a Wally Wood-ish feel to those textures, which is high praise. It always bugs me when people don't draw the Mole Man particularly ugly. The whole point of his character is that he was found so repulsive looking by humanity that he retreated underground. And he just looks like, a guy who's not movie star handsome, but, whatever. I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah, so on page 20, panel 2, Cyclops comes up to Angel, whose memory had been wiped earlier, and says, now, to see if the Mole Man told the truth about that Mists of Leave business, or Lethe, or Letha, or whatever it is, which is actually from ancient mythology. And then he thinks to himself, if he did, this antidote ray he concocted for us should... Then he's like, oh, it worked. He's coming around. When did the Mole Man concoct an antidote ray for them? Did you guys notice that?
Nope.
Is that something that we saw happen?
It was while Fury was putting the mask on that guy.
Yes, exactly. Anyway, as you said, it's a nice change of pace to get some Adkins artwork here. As much as I usually describe Werner Roth as aggressively adequate, this is a step above that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, this has been an odd selection of issues that you chose here. No,
what was in the other issues? Like Matt keeps saying this to me too. He's like, "Whoa, interesting."
Well,
like, and the other ones are like all classics. Oh, okay.
You got 0 Kirby and a lot of Adkins and Thomas.
But I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed today going through these 4 issues. I don't mean to imply that you have ruined our day. This has been fun. You chose poorly. I just rewatched that movie with my kids. This has been a lot of fun. Do you have any final thoughts on July 1967 Marvel Comics, Dan?
It's interesting to see like what all is happening at the same time, because some of it feels more like comics of the past. Some of it feels like comics yet to come. And to see that like, oh no, these were all issues that would have come out at the same time is interesting to me.
Yeah. And you were saying that you were glad to get the comics with all the original ads in them because I sent you the scans.
Yes.
Were there any ads in particular that stood out to you?
There's like one for like an atomic smoke bomb. I'm like, I don't know if children should have radio.
Hey,
there's one that's just like, it just says worms, and it's like a pellet you can put in some water and like a fake worm grows out of it. And then at the end of the ad, it says it's harmless, which I liked a lot.
I read comic book ads, and for the most part, they're adorable. And it's like, oh, isn't that sweet? What strange comics ads. But there's also a real edge of exploitation in comics ads.
Yeah.
Because these comics are being sold to kids, but they are also being sold to adults who are not exactly succeeding in life. And there's a definite strain of that in these ads like, is your hair growing or going? But one of the things that really drives me nuts about these comics is the ads like you get in this issue between pages 16 and 17, where there's two different ads on the same page of poems wanted for songs and records,
Yes.
and song ideas wanted. And then we'll try to, sell them to Tin Pan Alley and get them turned into songs. And I'm like,
You'll be paid
okay.
in exposure.
Exactly. And I'm like, yeah, they're not talking about money here. They're not talking about us paying you money or you paying us money. I suspect that eventually there would be a touch that would get involved here, and they would hit the supposed songwriters who thought that they were going to get fame and fortune. I suspect that they would eventually have to pay some money themselves, or at the very least, they would not get paid for their songs being turned into song lyrics. But stuff like this, where it's like, look, I'm someone who helps aspiring writers, and anyone who it seems like is exploiting aspiring writers really gets me. Really, I'm like,
The one that perturbed me was there's an ad for Darling Pet Monkey, and I'm like, this better be a scam. I would hate to think that someone was illegally sending out squirrel monkeys with his
Wait, wasn't that real?
Oh no!
Maybe it wasn't the monkeys, but it was
Herman's
some kind of actual animal that was being sold like that. And I want to say that was it. I'd have to go back and double check, but I think that was actually a real thing.
Makes me
sorry
sad.
to disappoint you, Dan. Yeah.
But, you talk about the ads and, just worms. A memory that I have, and I don't know whether you have this memory, Matt, because you were 3 years younger than me and I was 8 at the time. But when we first had
Bloody Mash Rat, Giant Slimy Snake.
Thank you. Yes, that was it. On the drive back from Florida, from the rainy, cold Florida vacation where our parents bought us some comics to keep us busy and we became hooked, there had the ads in there, and one of them was a novelty thing trying to sell you a replica Bloody Mashed Rat, and another one was a giant slimy snake. And Matt and I were just chanting that in the back seat as we drove back from Florida.
Because I think our parents had read us the comic and we'd been like, read us the ads too. And our parents are like, okay, we'll read you the ads. And then they read us about how you could order a Bloody Mashed Rat or a giant slimy snake. And they'd be like, oh, we regret reading of that ad. That's gross. And we'd be like, you find it gross, do you? Bloody Mashed Rat, giant slimy snake, Bloody Mashed Rat, giant slimy snake, which we did the entire way home, the entire 10-hour drive home.
Well, hey, I'm sure they thought at least they're not fighting in the backseat.
Yeah,
exactly. They're teamed up against us. Okay, Dan, well, we will let you go. You do a fantastic podcast called The Flophouse. You are involved in other wonderful things, and we look forward to getting more of your writing in various ways soon. Is there anything you want to plug before you go besides The Flophouse?
No, I mean, mostly the Flophouse. You can find it at flophousepodcast.com. I have a newsletter that I started because I guess if you're an out of work writer, you're like, I should start a newsletter. And that's at danmccoyinterests.com. You can't look up old episodes of The Daily Show anymore because they've been scrubbed from the internet, robbing me of
breaks my heart.
My 2-cent residual checks.
Well, the thing is, I used to on the regular go back and watch the super cut of the Even Stevens segment, which was one of my complete happy places, was to rewatch that thing whenever I was feeling down, and it's gone. It's gone.
Yeah. That's what happens when these corporations are in charge. That's the message I'll leave you all with.
Yes. Okay, well, Dan, congratulations on everything that you were doing, and it is fantastic to have you here. Everyone should go listen to The Flophouse if you never have. We loved having you, and we'd love to have you back anytime.
Please, anytime.
Okay, fantastic. We will go ahead and leave it there. We will see you soon.
All right, thank you, everybody. Take care and stay safe out there.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, we now have a Patreon where you can show your appreciation. If you've got a few bucks, head over to patreon.marvelrereadclub.com to support us. Also, you can still rate and review us at your podcatcher of choice, and that would be greatly appreciated as well. You can find us online at marvelrereadclub.com, as well as Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. See you next time.